Welcome to Rehash.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Rehash, a Web3 podcast. I'm your host, Diana Chen, and today we're speaking with dthinksweb3, founder of Designer DAO and a UX contributor at Coordinape and Duality. In this episode, we'll be talking about UX design in Web3, closing the opportunity gap and hiring outside of your network, and how to make the mental shift from user to owner. dthinksweb3 was nominated by Fifth World Zach and voted onto the podcast by Fifth World Zach, Daisy Aliato, Aaron Soskin, Govern, and Dina Burke. Before we dive into our conversation, here's a quick word from the Web3 projects that helped make this season possible.
Social media wasn't designed for ads and algorithms. It was made for people. And at Lens Protocol, we're putting people back in control. We're not looking for users' data. We're here to build a community of collaborators, builders, artists, and dreamers ready to unlock a new world of social media. This isn't just an app. It's a flourishing ecosystem of platforms and experiences owned and operated by the developers and creators who are bringing it to life. In the Lensverse, you don't just own your content, you own everything. Your data, your connections, the value you bring to the table, it all stays in your possession, exactly where it should be. As a creator, the Lens ecosystem offers a new set of tools for connecting with your audience. Your data is truly portable and belongs to you. Post once and distribute everywhere in the Lensverse. You can even take your followers with you from app to app. As a developer, you can skip right past building the base layers and scaling your users by plugging your new app directly into Lens's existing infrastructure and community. So whether you create with a brush or a camera, sound waves or lines of code, it's time you got your due. Come create the future of social media with us on Lens Protocol. Lens is the last social media handle you'll ever need.
Have you seen how epic Ambire Wallet is?
How epic it is?
Yeah, cue the music. Ambire is a Web3 wallet that makes crypto self-custody easy and secure for everyone. Instead of relying on clunky seed phrases, you can create an account with the hardware wallet or username and password, secure it with two-factor authentication, and regain access with Ambire's cloud recovery. Need to pay out some contributors or execute a bunch of trades? No problem, Chief. Queue up as many transactions as you want, and when you're ready, execute the entire batch at the same time, paying gas only once. You can even prepay for gas with stablecoins or Ambire's native wallet token, which will get you some cash back. Without ever leaving the Ambire interface, you can manage assets from over a dozen chains, safely migrate them with Ambire's built-in bridge, and seamlessly interact with dApps like Uniswap, Aave, and Snapshot, all within the same transaction. Plus, Ambire is constantly growing their dApp catalog with trusted partners and collaborating with builders who want to establish the new standard for smart contract wallets. So, pretty epic, huh?
Yeah, I already know all that though. I've had an Ambire wallet for months.
And you didn't tell me?
You never asked.
To get involved and truly own your assets, go to ambire.com.
How was your day?
Bad.
What happened?
I bought some NFTs and then they just disappeared.
Sounds like your NFT creator should have used NFT.storage.
NFT. What?
NFT.storage. Come on, I'll show you. With NFT.storage, anyone can easily upload their NFT data to a decentralized and reliable storage network, completely for free.
Wow! How does it work?
Well, instead of relying on centralized and impermanent storage solutions, NFT.storage uploads your files to IPFS and Filecoin. These are powerful peer-to-peer networks that are made for the decentralized web. Thanks to IPFS's unique storage system, you can be confident that once your files are uploaded, they'll be accessible from anywhere in the world for as long as you'd like. They're already trusted by some of the biggest names in Web3, like OpenSea, Magic Eden, and Rarible. By adding files to these networks for free, NFT.storage is helping to turn proper NFT data management into a public good. This will ensure that NFTs will remain accessible and secure in the long run, so you won't get rugged again.
Gee, so I just upload my files and NFT.storage will take care of the rest?
Now you're getting it! Go to NFT.storage today to upload some NFT data of your own, for free. And be sure to follow NFT.storage on Twitter, at NFTDOTStorage.
So without further ado, here's our guest, dthinksweb3. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi.
How's it going?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for being here with us. I know Zach from Coordinape nominated you and got you voted onto the podcast. And I know he was advocating for you really hard on Twitter, it's always a fun process to see people campaigning for themselves or for other people that they want everybody else to vote for. So I'm really happy you're here. I've got a lot of questions for you. I've kind of dove into your work a little bit in UX. As we all know, UX is kind of a big topic in Web3 because Web3 is notorious for having bad UX, for lack of better words. Can you maybe start off by just talking about some of the ways that you've noticed Web3 projects sort of missing in the UX department?
Yeah, I think because this is a new frontier, people want to recreate paradigms. They want to reinvent everything. I think one of them is every time we face a problem in Web3, we want to redo everything, which is great on paper, but most people have like years, decades of experience with certain UX patterns and certain user flows. And so when you throw things like new language, new paradigms, and then also new UX patterns, all of that creates a lot of friction for the user that is hard to navigate. It also just limits our ability to appeal to other demographics of people other than Web3 investors. So that's one. The second thing I notice is like the lack of use of symbols or visual representations of information. Right now, I don't know how many times I've been in a meeting and they're like, let's just throw a tooltip. And like tooltips and language don't really do it because honestly, people don't read. That's like one of the first rules of UX that you learn. And then two, like people need visual representations of things to ground them in an experience. So like for instance, I would love for us to have like a universal like wallet icon so people see it and know that this is a Web3 app, things like that. And then the last thing I notice is a lack of accounting for affordances or context. We don't do a lot of user research in Web3, first of all. And then secondly, because we don't do a lot of research, it's hard for us to anticipate user needs, to know where the user is coming from in a user flow. And so a lot of times I see a lot of information overload in UIs. And honestly, a lot of places struggle with context and showing the right amount of information at any given time. That's why in Twitter, we have like 500 buttons right now for each tweet filled with like unnecessary information. So those are like kind of the few things I've noticed.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's kind of like the language is a big part of it. Like, first of all, using terms that maybe the mainstream audience doesn't understand. It's that lack of being able to be concise, maybe having too many words, trying to over explain something when, like you said, people on the internet don't really read. Like, we skim at best. And if you have paragraphs and paragraphs of text, like nobody's going to read that. And then it's also just not knowing who your audience is, like not doing that user research, which I've seen a lot of that personally is like, who are you really building for? And a lot of times it seems like to me that people in this space, builders in this space are building for themselves, a crypto native audience, but they're building a product that's meant for more of a mainstream audience. And so that sort of gap or conflict doesn't end up serving most projects very well.
Yeah, exactly. We're building for our friends essentially because this space started with literally a group of friends getting together and wanting to like hackathons and things like that. And so I think we need to shift our mindset to sort of a more global and just account for more demographics of people.
Yeah. What does that user research look like for you? Like what does your process look like when you conduct the user research to figure out who the audience even is before you start building?
Honestly, like most things, it depends on the on the context. But I will say I think the studies that I have found the most valuable are the studies that like probe into a very specific like problem or insight. Like for instance, at Coordinape, we did like a data study where we kind of asked like I think 15 or plus people like what pieces of data do they find valuable and had them kind of tell their story about their workflows and how they work. And through that, we kind of probed to reveal the things that they leverage to make decisions. And that was extremely helpful because Not only do I know, like, have a baseline for like who my users are by just asking them about their stories and things like that, but upon probing, now I know what information is valuable to them and what things are going to help make decisions. And I think that's another thing that's missing in Web3. Like, where there's just so much data overload, but like there's no point of view on that data. What am I supposed to do with this? And ask a lot of the user to then parse through and make decisions. And we're already too busy as it is in the industry.
So it's not just about collecting the data, but it's also about talking to your users to get their vantage point about what this data means to them.
And also just looking at one thing that I notice a lot in user research is like very surface level analysis. And you really need to get deeper into like what is the true pain point for this person? Like who are they? What are the problems that they're facing outside of the context of my app even? Like who is this person? And I think a lot of times we're so focused on like how a person applies to us that we don't think about like how do we apply to them? Like how are we in relation to the user or the person? And I think that then creates all these like UX issues because we're not accounting for like the whole person, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder at what point during the process of building a product does UX come in? Because, generally speaking, the founder gets an idea for a product, maybe a product that'll hopefully solve the problems that a certain group of people are facing. And then they go and conduct the user research to determine the specifics of what it is those people need and want to see in an app, right? So does that sound like generally the right flow, or would you say that UX maybe even comes in at an earlier stage than that?
I mean, ideally it comes in our earlier stage, but I am like aware that just resources aren't plentiful in Web3, and sometimes you have to make really tough decisions. But like for me, I think UX comes in like, I mean, maybe post MVP, or it's helpful to have a target audience in mind. Like we think that these people are around the people we want to target. And then go out and find those people and like learn about them, just like who they are, likes, dislikes, just general things. And then that data will help you have a baseline for like who you're building for. And that helps everything down the road. I think when I have research, that has helped me with feature prioritization, with product strategy, with all these things. And without it, you're kind of just taking shots in the dark, honestly.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I'm curious to hear about your experience working with a few different projects in the space. We've mentioned Coordinape already. You're a contributor there now. You've also worked on Sushi's Miso product, which is their NFT marketplace. Can you talk us through some of your experience working with those projects? And maybe, when you entered the project, what were some of the UX pitfalls or gaps that you identified, and how did you work to solve those?
Yeah, so I learned a few things. I guess a lot of times when I come in on a project, I've come in as like a user researcher / designer hybrid. So the one thing that I notice when I come into a project is a lack of just housekeeping in terms of research. So like I see like leading questions that are like too filled with bias. A lot of times I see like very rudimentary prototypes, like not well thought out user flows for the prototypes. And so I come in and I kind of like just establish like a baseline of like, this is how you do research well, essentially. And then what I learned in testing these user flows is like the competency and user groups in terms of like what they're familiar with in DeFi can range like widely. Like I'll do a user study and one person will be like a liquidity provider expert and like knows all of the exchanges and stuff and provides liquidity in all these places. And then one person, same like target user group will only know like a window of information about a certain thing about liquidity. So that's the thing that kind of I see it gets wrong about Web3 is like we just assume that a person knows a lot of the intricacies of some of these user flows, and just the education just varies so widely. And honestly, most things I've learned in Web3 were not really design related. It was like more culture related. For instance, like I learned how to completely simp for developers. to be honest, like when I first got into this space, like I wasn't used to being in a space where developers had so much sway and just a general bias for engineering as a whole in the industry. And I found that like more often than not, if I disagreed with a developer in design, like I wasn't gonna win that fight, especially if the person was like, further up in the organization. But in those kind of like feuds, I've learned to build alongside developers instead of in this kind of siloed way that I was used to before. And if you're working with developers and if you're allowing them to be a part of the creation process, I find that I have way less disagreements and like, quarrels with small like UX things when we're both a part of that process versus when we're in like our siloed camps. So that's one big thing I've noticed. I noticed that hierarchy is not a bad thing. Like, I don't know. I don't know. I'm just kind of weary of this whole like organization decentralization thing. I haven't seen it work super well. I'm open to be proven wrong about DAOs. Like, I really want someone to be. I even asked this on Twitter. I'm like, please, somebody tell me a great experience you've had with a DAO or like being a part of a DAO, because I feel like we have this like idealistic view of DAO, but then like the actual lived experience of being in a DAO is actually pretty stressful. Don't get me wrong. Like, I love that this space is way less bureaucratic. It's way less performative. But with DAOs, there's a new set of problems. For instance, I see a lot of like cliques forming in DAOs, like an in versus out crowd, like, high school level cool kids situation starts happening. And then generally, narcissistic people thrive in low boundary environments. And like, we're so idealistic that we don't account for bad actors in our organization structure. Like, I was a part of Sushi when like a lot of like very public things started happening, and like it was just, stressful because one, this was my livelihood, I worked there, and then two, the loose structure like made work so chaotic. And I start to wonder, like, even if we had like loose boundaries and loose hierarchies, would Sushi have been better off? And then I guess the last thing I've learned just in product building is not when I first got into Web3, I was kind of super bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and wanted to build all the things all the time. And then especially going from like, the woohoo, like money everywhere phase to like the bear market that is now, I've had to learn how to really consider scope. And that goes back to user research. So like, if I have user research, whenever I'm developing a feature, I know scope wise what can go out versus what we need to keep in. And so I've learned how to make smaller and smaller implementations and products versus like these huge resource heavy features. So I like basically don't be afraid to cut the scope. Honestly, I look at a scope and now I'm like, okay, what's one more thing I can cut? Versus before I used to be like, what else can we build? Because you just have to be conservative, especially now.
Yeah, for sure. I love how candid you were with all of that, especially your DAO takes. I think, a lot of people in this space are like, woo, DAOs, like, especially on this podcast. I mean, we're bullish on DAOs. Rehash is, structured somewhat as a DAO where we give our community ownership over major decisions we make on the podcast, like which guests get to come on. But I think, like you said, there are a lot of pitfalls with DAOs as well, and we should talk about them instead of pretending like they don't exist. One thing that came up for me when you were talking about, just how the types of people that DAOs tend to attract because of how they're structured and how it can kind of turn a little bit cliquey, and a lot of that is probably, I mean, from what I've seen at least, it seems like it's just based on social capital from Twitter is mostly where that comes from. And I think it can be difficult for new people to join a DAO and find their voice, or, have the boldness to speak up and express how they're feeling. Did you ever feel that struggle, or when you first joined, these projects, like big projects like Sushi, I'm sure it maybe felt a little intimidating to be the new person there, or even the other DAOs that you've been a part of. How have you been able to, feel confident in your skills and your ability to contribute and find your voice and speak up, despite being like the new kid on the block?
Honestly, I'm just a really crass person. I don't know. Like I tend to be kind of like a heart on my sleeve kind of person. But when I first joined an organization, I realized like, you don't know me. I don't know you. And so my priority is just competency. I want to show you that I'm competent, that I know what I'm talking about, that I can make your life easier. And then once I kind of build that trust just through working, then that's when I start to get a little bit more confidence enough to speak up in meetings and stuff. And to be honest, like it really depends on the culture. Like if the person who brought me on is like alongside me, like shepherding me through the organization, it is a lot easier than if I'm just hired, thrown to the wolves, and just like expected to just like navigate. But honestly, I try to be as outspoken as possible because I feel like I don't like the idea of we have a lived experience, but then we have what we talk about. And then there's just all these experiences that like everybody's afraid to say something about or to like point out the elephant in the room. And I'm just kind of person ever since college is just like just say it. Like just name the thing, because hiding it, all that does is create unnecessary anxiety and like backroom talks and like water cooler chats in the background. And I've just loved like the idea of transparency. And if an organization will tell me whether it's right or wrong for me based on the reaction of me being fully myself. And if I feel like I'm getting resistance or I feel like I'm being stifled, then all that is telling me that maybe that's not the right place for me.
Yeah, that's super admirable of you that you're able to do that. And I totally agree there. I'm personally probably guilty of doing this as well, as, like having a lived experience, but having a different experience that we talk about. And maybe I think part of that is because the people working in the space, we want Web3 to work out so bad and we want DAOs to work out so bad. And so we're almost trying to craft this narrative that we want to see become true, like manifesting this dream kind of organization that we want to see come to fruition. So maybe that's part of why people do that. But I totally agree with you. We need to call it what it is and really, show people like the good, the bad, the ugly. And if you're still here and willing to stick it through, then clearly you really believe in it and you're willing to see past the bad things, or at least, keep working on those things. One thing too that I think is challenging, and you've clearly done a great job of this, but I think can be hard for a lot of people, especially women, people of color, people who do not represent the majority of the people working in this space, is even going out and seeking that job opportunity, getting hired, finding the DAO to join and to even, give them a chance. I think that process can be difficult. And I know this is something that you have thought about and talked about, is like where Web3 still misses in the DEI department. Like in the traditional corporate world, DEI has become this big thing. And in Web3, we talk about diversity, more and more, which is good, but we're still so far off from where we need to be. Can you talk about some of those gaps that you personally have seen or experienced that, we should all be made aware of?
Yeah, this is like a multi-level kind of issue. Like for one, the industry is built with a bunch of people in these networks that have friends that they brought on. And so if you're a guy who built this product with all his friends and you happen to be in community with a lot of guys and that's who you hang out with and that's who you're comfortable with, naturally when it comes to hire for your organization, you're going to have a bias. You're going to bring on your friends. And because a lot of organizations in Web3 are grassroots, that's how a lot of it happens. And these founders, they have, they're taking on a huge amounts of risk, and there's a comfort in building with someone that you are familiar with, essentially. The problem that creates is like a othering of everybody who is not in your community. And it's not anyone's fault, but like America is just is really segregated. And the idea that an upper middle class person, not person of color, is going to be in a community with people of color is not really common, fortunately or unfortunately. So that's the problem there. And then honestly, I've seen that whenever a role opens up, it's that network that gets reached out to first. Someone in the organization has to make DEI a priority and like actually reach out to these groups when they have openings in order for that to even start to be a thing. So that's one thing. And then I think secondly, honestly, it's been really hard navigating these like women focused diversity focused groups, because right now the internet is just so opportunistic. You never know if a group is for somebody's resume. You never know if it's just like a grift, or it's hard to navigate like what's real and what's not real. And then some groups, to be frank, feel like elitist, like social clubs that I'm not going to have access to anyway as a woman of color. So I think we just need to do more outreach and bridge that gap. And I think the barriers that we put in front of people, like, these social club like fees, and like basically being comfortable with your networks, even the women focused groups, sometimes I don't really see myself in their pictures. I look at these groups and I'm like, I don't see anybody who looks like me that's in this group. So it's hard for me to like go and apply for a thing, and it's like, is this even for me? And those are just kind of questions that come up. And so I guess the answer to that is just generally just more effort in recruiting women and people of color, and take that risk of hiring someone that you quote unquote don't know. Honestly, in my career, I wouldn't have never got a job at Coordinape if the person who hired me wasn't adamant about going on Twitter and finding me. They found me on Twitter. They liked my tweets, and they gave me the opportunity because they wanted to hire somebody who wasn't a white man. And that's the reason why I got the job at Coordinape. At Sushi, if it wasn't for my friend who saw my potential and like introduced me to people at Sushi, I would have never got the job at Sushi. So it's those micro interactions that like can help someone's career greatly. And I don't know if we're really doing that well. The only organization that I know that's doing that well, shout out to like Baddies in Web3, Baddies in Tech actually, is led by Allie. She's doing a lot of great work. She's been on a lot of podcasts in terms of like elevating, especially like Black women in Web3. But I haven't seen too many places like doing the grassroots work. So there's one thing about Twitter and being all cute and stuff, and there's one thing about like actually doing the work.
Yeah, I was going to ask if there are any organizations that you can call out that, people should be engaging with or checking out, like Baddies in Tech, because like you said, people hire within their network, and, like white dudes tend to be friends with other white dudes, and it's hard to branch out when that's sort of the community you've always known. And it's hard to branch out and like, where do you even go to find people that look different from you, that come from different backgrounds from you? I think these are all real life challenges. Like it's a lot easier said than done to say, you got to go out, you got to branch out, you got to like go look for people that look different from you and be friends with them. But in reality, like that is a hard thing to do. So I think organizations like Baddies in Tech, I think, are super awesome because they're doing a lot of good work in finding people that look like them and that fit in their community and putting them out to the forefront and telling people about them, showcasing them on crypto Twitter so that we can find them easily. Are there any other organizations like that you can call out that we should be aware of? And we'll link all these in the show notes too, so people can just find them easily, or any other actionable steps, like tips and advice that you have for how we can actually branch out of our comfort zone community that we've always known and find people that look different from us.
Yeah, another organization that I've been a part of this year is SheFi. I've seen them do a lot of work in terms of like offering scholarships, having people talk, things like that. And I think the first step is, honestly, these groups are grateful to have somebody come to them and be like, hey, I have a job. Do you have someone in your network? Honestly, it takes one just initiative of like reaching out to these groups and saying, hey, I have a role. I would love to for someone in your community to have this role. So that's one, just reaching out to these organizations that are already dedicated to this. I think two, if you have a role, making a conscious effort to be like, sorry, but I'm not going to hire another dude. Honestly, that's the only reason why I work at Coordinape, is because someone was like, please don't hire another dude. So just having setting that goal, and whenever you're looking through candidates and stuff, and just making that a priority, that takes like little to no work just to like find these groups. Because I feel like some founders be like, we can't find the women in Web3. And I'm just like, really? Like, there's like 500. There's so many of us here. So that's not really an excuse anymore. And I think making an effort to try to, if you can't diversify your friend group, at least diversify your point of view and your thought, and engaging with content and in books and literature about other ethnic groups, other people, other experiences. I think submerging yourself in other people's experiences will allow you to kind of challenge your own biases and just be aware of the social segmentations and challenges from different groups.
Yeah, I think those are all really good tips. And I've actually, in my entire time in Web3, I've only experienced one instance where somebody, a founder of a project came to me and said that they were looking for a co-founder, and they absolutely like wanted their co-founder to be a female. Mm-hmm. And they were asking me if I knew any, good candidates for them. And I thought that was so cool. And honestly, like, I think it's super cool that they have made that one of their values, is that they want more diversity in their founding team, because it's not just about, hiring a more diverse workforce, but it's also about like boosting those people to the top, as the founding team, as the C-suite. So I thought it was super cool that they wanted to do that, but also like a little disappointing that in my, 3 years or so in Web3 I've only heard that happen once.
Yeah,
ever.
That's sad.
So yeah, that is sad. But I do think that, that's what it takes, is that intentionality of saying, we absolutely want to find a female founder or a whatever founder. This is a value that we have. We know that this is going to help us build a better product, because it's going to give us more diverse perspectives than we would be able to have as a group of, dudes that look the same. So I think it's super cool, and that's really what it takes. And organizations like Baddies in Tech and SheFi are doing a fantastic job, at least boosting women in the space. So switching gears a little bit, another question I had for you, going back kind of to the product side of building apps in Web3, is other than UX, which we've already talked about as a big challenge that Web3 projects face, I think another big challenge with especially onboarding the masses to Web3 is that there's this mental shift that we need people to make when they go from using Web2 apps to Web3 apps. And it's this mental shift of feeling like you're the user to feeling like you're the owner. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so basically, in capitalism, we have been trained to be users, to be consumers, to be workers. And because of that, whenever someone's going to Web3, they expect to be quote unquote taken care of, that they can go to a customer service, they can go to a MetaMask. Like, honestly, if you read the customer reviews of any Web3 apps, it's full of people just like, this didn't work, it's a scam, blah, blah, and not understanding, even though I know the app has tons of tutorials on like what the things are, people are just so used to being taken care of. And so because of that, there's like a friction in going to Web3. Because of like, honestly, the rise of just consumer culture, we kind of have lost the art of delayed gratification that is ownership. And ownership is what separates, the elites from the working class. And Web3 makes equity opportunities way more accessible than before. But unfortunately, most people don't enjoy the labor that goes into maintaining their assets. Like, how many people do you know like have lost their assets or lost their keys or lost all these things? Like, that's just like basic ownership responsibility of like keeping your keys in a safe place, basic like crypto security safety, like all these things. And so that shift, that's basically is the biggest, like, I think onboarding blocker of Web3 is like knowing that you're stepping into a place of ownership. And I don't think we do a good job of like cueing that to the users all the time either.
Yeah, that's a really good point to call out, is that you get more rewards as the owner, but you also get more responsibilities. It's like if you own a house, if you buy a house, you're going to have more responsibilities than if you're just renting, and something breaks. You just call your landlord and you're like, please fix this, and they fix it. But when you own your house, you're the landlord. You have to figure out how to fix all of these things. You have to figure out how to take care of your property. But then the upside is so much bigger too. If you're renting, you have no equity. You're not going to get anything from this property that you're living in. Whereas if you're the owner, like you put in all this work, but then you'll reap the rewards too. This is something that you own. This is equity that you're building. This is, value that accrues to you. So that's a really interesting way to think about, ownership in Web3 as well, is like people complain about having to keep track of their keys and having to keep track of all these things, but it's like the upside for you there is so much more. So I guess like with that said, is your view that we should do a better job as Web3 builders to build out these intermediary steps and handhold our customer a little bit more and give them that traditional Web2 experience that they're used to? Or is your perspective that, we need to help mainstream users understand this difference between being an owner versus a renter? And if we help them understand this, then they'll be more willing to take on the responsibilities once they understand the upside.
I think a little bit of both. I think one, we have to demonstrate value. Like no one's gonna like commit to a chunk of work without like some sort of reward at the end, if that makes sense. Like, when I go to buy a house, I know that's going to take a lot of work, but I also know the potential equity that I can get out of that home, if that makes sense. And so I think we don't do a great job of always demonstrating value. I strongly believe in like in-person meetups and communities to start these conversations. Because like online, like I said before, is becoming increasingly opportunistic. You don't know if like a community is trying to scam you or if you're like with a grifter. And so like one example I can think of, like I'm not a huge like Dave Ramsey fan, but I do admire like the work that he's done to collectively educate people on financial literacy. And he's done that through church communities and like kind of broken down step programs. And so I think things like that, but from a Web3 perspective of like just collectively upping the education of people in our communities will help with that shift. Because I think, honestly, we rely too freaking much on software. Software can only do so much to educate. Like there's only so much I'm going to read. There's only so much that I'm going to engage with. And I am more likely to remember an interaction that I had in person than a conversation I had on Telegram. That's just kind of like, facts. And so I think more things like ETH Denver, but even like an ETH Denver, quote unquote, but like geared towards more of a retail user and like more approachable, like stuff like that to like, bring people into our space instead of like making people come to us, I think is a part of that shift.
Yeah, I think I absolutely agree with that. I think nothing really can fully replace in-person interactions, no matter how hard we're trying to do that, at least from my personal experience. I guess final question for you, for anybody listening who's maybe, listening to this conversation and they're newer to the space and they're like, well, this ownership thing sounds really great and all, but I don't fully know what that entails or what that actually means. Like I can conceptualize owning a house versus renting an apartment, but I can't conceptualize owning anything on a digital asset or anything in my wallet or anything like that. How would you explain to somebody, like give us the Eli 5 of what is the upside you get from ownership on the internet?
Yeah, so I like to use the Web 2 versus Web 3 in terms of data. Okay, so you interact with Google, you interact with social media apps, and they know your name, your age, and they use that information to sell it to advertisers. So the reason why these apps are free is because they're selling your data, who you are as a person, your activity to someone else, and you're not a part of that transaction at all. All you get is a free app. In Web 3, you own your data. So if you want to interact with Coinbase or even more DeFi example like a Sushi Swap, they have to ask you for your information. Because they're asking you for that information, you can be a part of getting revenue from your data and from the assets in your wallet. So because of that, every interaction that you have on Web3 is because it's permission based. Now that gives you these small little windows for opportunities to monetize the things that you have. So you've been using Google and Instagram all your life. How much money have you made from that? Zero. Like interacting with DeFi apps, like the more and more you've done it, you'll start to slowly accrue, things like interest, things like airdrops, things like that. And that can, then add up to something valuable. So I would kind of explain it kind of like that, because that's, these are apps that people use often and they can kind of have the mental models for it. But that's kind of how I describe it. Like, for instance, like I was an early user of ENS and I got like a handful of tokens from them. I didn't do anything for that,
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's the hard part about explaining that is that nowadays everybody expects instant gratification, and it's like people are like, oh, well, I put $100 into this DeFi app. When am I going to see returns? It's been a month. I haven't seen any returns, or like price just keeps dropping and then they get scared and they take everything out and they're like, this whole thing's a scam. So I think the not being able to have instant gratification thing is difficult, but I think that also goes along with the education piece of helping people understand like the core purpose of all of this, the long-term goal, what that looks like, and how you can start setting yourself up for success now, you know, knowing what we're building towards.
Mm-hmm. And honestly, that's how people who have wealth think. Like the haves and the have-nots, like people who have think like this. They think about, okay, this is an investment of my time. This is so they're always planting seeds that grow. And I think that's kind of the shift is like if you want to get out, and that's honestly the reason why I'm in Web3 is because of the opportunities for wealth equality. And so I think just basic financial literacy as well will help onboard users into Web3 because then they'll be able to see the connections.
That's so true. That's so true. Well, thank you so much, Dee. I've had an absolutely great time talking to you about all of these things. The last thing we're going to do before we go is play a quick little game. And this season, every season this game changes. This season, we're playing the word association game. What I've done is I've asked Twitter and I've written down, I think I've got about 50 pieces of paper in this little container. And these are words that are often overused or misused in Web3. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw 10 of these at random. And I'm just going to say a word and you're going to say the first word that comes to mind. It doesn't have to be insightful. It doesn't even have to make sense. I could say Web3 and you could say dog. It doesn't have to make sense. But we're just going to go through this super quick rapid fire. I'm just going to do 10 in a row. Okay. You ready?
Okay.
All right. Okay. So first one, creator economy.
Economy? Just repeating what you said.
Can't say the word I said. Only rule is you cannot say the word I just said.
Okay. Artist.
Privacy.
Mine.
Identity.
Politics.
Protocol.
Ecosystem.
Ooh. Interoperable.
Question mark.
Yeah, same. Merkle tree.
Engineering.
Creator.
I just said creator in my head. Creator, God.
Substrate.
Manuscript.
Moat.
Boat.
Now we're just rhyming. Oh shoot, how many have I done? I haven't even been counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, so one more. Okay. Last one. Modular.
Blocks.
Okay, nice. Good job. How was that? Was that fun? Was that stressful?
It was stressful because I don't do good on the spot. I'm like a deer in headlights. I'm like
Oh yeah, I like at the end when you just started rhyming because you couldn't think of anything else.
I was just like, you know what? I'm just gonna start rapping. That's it.
Yeah. I love it. All right. Well, thanks for entertaining me with this game. Thanks for all the insights that you had that you shared with our listeners. Before you go, tell people where they can find you if they want to hit you up with more questions or just follow along. And then feel free to also plug away at any of the projects you're working on, Designer DAO, Coordinape, Duality, any of the things you like.
Yeah, so you can usually find me on Twitter. I'm usually texting some random stuff on there, which dthinksweb3. Check us out at Designer DAO. We're inconsistently doing podcasts on that platform. And then, so that's mostly it. Coordinape. We're actually launching something interesting mid-February. So check us out for some newness in February. And then, I think Duality is the same. I think we're launching sometime February, March. Look out for that too.
Cool. I think this is going to come out probably after those things launch. Are you able to share with us what they are?
Yeah, Coordinape is having a rebrand. So we're gonna have all new logos, colors, the app's gonna look different, it's a whole new freshness. And then Duality is just gonna launch, I think. It's gonna be available on Cosmos.
Exciting. Very cool. All right. Well, we'll be sure to link all of those in the show notes. Thank you again so much, Dee. Really appreciate you taking the time to be here. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in as always. And we'll be back again next Thursday for another episode of Rehash.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Rehash. Rehash is hosted by Diana Chen, produced and edited by Ellie Dots and Tyler Internet, and sponsored by Lens, Ambire Wallet, and NFT.storage. Rehash is also supported by Rehash DAO, a community of NFT holders who curate our guest lineup each season. To get involved, head over to our website at rehashweb3.xyz and collect this episode as an NFT. Anyone who collects an episode becomes a part of Rehash DAO and will be able to nominate guests for future seasons. Voting rights are reserved for our guests, sponsors, and OG crowdfund supporters. And to learn more about how to become a guest or sponsor, go to rehashweb3.xyz/podcast. Finally, be sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at rehashweb3 or on Lens at rehash.lens.